Land and its value. In the discussion of things and of their value and of changes in value, we have purposely omitted thus far the consideration of land values. To the economist, land and land values stand in a class by themselves. They are not wealth in the sense that the products of labor are wealth, but land values and other values are so readily interchangeable in the world of affairs that men forget that they are not of one and the same kind. Nor is it necessary in the discussion of honesty to bear the distinction in mind except to note the difference between the modus operandi of social forces in the causation of land values and that of the same forces with reference to the value of other things. All values are produced by, or rather are the result of, society, and values in land are the same in this respect as other values. Value is the balancing point of the forces of supply and demand in land, the same as in wheat. But in wheat or in other things produced by man, a large demand manifesting itself in the raising of values stimulates the supply so that the upward tendency of value is arrested or reversed, while in land an extra supply to meet an increased demand is physically impossible except in very limited degree. High prices in wheat send men to producing wheat, but high prices in land cannot turn men to the production of land. New means of transportation may gradually open up new regions and bring them into competition with the old, but the total land area is a fixed quantity, and when once any region has been brought into complete touch with society, its effect as a deterrent on land values has been felt once for all. The result is that as population increases and civilization advances, the demand for land becomes greater and greater while the supply remains practically the same. Consequently, land values go up and up in the great centers of population almost without limit. This condition is very marked under our present system of land ownership, but it would obtain under any system, since it is due not so much to the fact that the land area is a fixed and unalterable quantity as it is to the very nature of human society. Man is a gregarious animal, and his community life is grouped around certain points of vantage on the earth's surface where, for one reason or another, he finds it most convenient to congregate for the purpose of production and exchange. The general tendency is for every individual in the community to get as near as possible to the center, and there can be only a certain area of land within a certain radius of that center. No matter if the entire land supply were illimitable, the amount of land within the 10 miles of the New York or Chicago City Hall or any other community center would continue a fixed quantity forever. Improved transit facilities may relieve the pressure upon the land at the center for a brief period of time, but in the end they would only increase the area available as a source of congestion and make the centripetal land pressure so much the worse, and land values would continue to go up accordingly. There are instances, of course, where through the shifting of population or the changing of other conditions, land values go the other way, but everywhere within the limits of society, with the natural increase of inhabitants, other things being equal, the general tendency is upward. We have seen that all values, land values included, are social and that they are the result of social forces, but land values are social in a more marked degree and in a more striking manner. Society determines the value of wheat and other commodities in a way that acts upon the entire volume of that commodity in the country or in the world. With allowances for cost of transportation, the relative supply and demand acts upon every bushel of wheat of the same grade with like results the world over. When one bushel goes up in value, every other bushel goes up with it. Not so with land. The demand for land is in large degree a demand for specific land, land in a certain place or within a certain area. The demand for land is local, the supply is local, and the value is local. Then, too, in using wheat and other products of labor, society takes them out of existence and destroys their value. But in using land, society not only leaves the value but adds to it. In all but the crudest forms of production, especially in manufacturing and in merchandising, the more the land is used, the greater its value, and the greater the value of other land in the same vicinity. The phenomenon of rent. Thus, community life acts upon land direct, not in a general way upon all land, but specifically upon certain tracts and areas. This demand for specific areas of land bearing a certain relation to the local community or to the world at large results in the phenomenon of rent, which is the economist's name for land value and is usually expressed in terms of annual use and payment. This must not be confused with house rent, which is in large degree interest on money invested in buildings, although house rent, as now known, usually includes an element of land rent. Rent as applied to land is simply the premium that men are willing to pay for certain locations on the face of the earth. Economists recognize a fixed law of rent, the rental of any land being determined by its capacity for production of any kind over and above that of the best land that can be had without the payment of such a premium. There is always land that can be had free if one can get to it. It has no economic value because men do not want it enough to bid against each other for its possession. It is either useless in itself or it is located where men cannot avail themselves of its utility to advantage, or there is enough of it to supply the demands of all who can reach it. But land value develops just the instant the quality, the quantity, or the location of land are such that more than one man desires the same site. The measure of that value is the premium that men are willing to pay for it, and that is always within a narrow margin of its average productive capacity over and above that of the valueless land that can be had free. Beyond this difference, this premium value, the landowner cannot raise the price and find a tenant or a purchaser, and below this difference, this premium value, he cannot lower the price in any considerable degree without having so great a demand for the land that he will speedily raise it again. Thus, the landowner's part of the joint product of labor and land is practically everything over and above what the same labor could have produced on the valueless free land, the difference being just enough in the average land worker's favor to keep him from taking himself and his labor to the wilderness. And where there is no wilderness to which he could go if he would, as is rapidly coming to be the case throughout the civilized world through the land grabbing of the monopolists and the holding of land out of use, how heavy is the landowner's grip on the land worker. And by land worker, we do not mean only the agricultural laborer, but every man who produces anything or performs any service upon the face of the earth. And this principle of rent, acting in this manner as inexorable as the law of gravity, is continually present in the value of land, whether used or idle, and whether used by a tenant or by the owner. When it happens, less and less often, alas, that the landowner and the land worker are the same person, under present conditions his reward comes not alone from his labor, but in part varying with the value of the land from his land ownership. And the same law holds good of land used for residence. Practically all the value of the desirability of the site goes to the landlord. The land user enjoys the blessings of civilization, governmental protection, public improvements, schools, churches, and other like benefits, all of which find quick expression in the increase of rent, only as he pays their full value to the landowner, who alone profits financially from them. Status of land values. But this portion of the product of labor that goes to the landowner as such, this premium that men pay for a certain vantage ground for production or residence, what is its status in the world of honesty? If every man has a right to what he produces, and no man has a right to what he does not produce, save that all have equal rights in land, where in the light of these fundamental principles do land values belong, and this perpetual increase in land values? There can be but one answer. We have seen that the right to a thing carries with it the right to the value that society attaches to it. If all men have equal rights to land, all men have equal rights to the value that society, the society of which they are a working and producing part, attaches to land. So that honesty demands not only that all men have equal access to land, but also that all men share equally in the benefits of land values. The landowner as such, or the landlord as he is usually called, gives no equivalent in return for his ever-increasing share in the results of human labor. He did not produce the land. As landowner, he produces nothing. He adds not one iota to the world's wealth, and yet he compels the world to pay a burden of tribute to him so vast that society barely staggers along under the load. His is thus something for nothing game par excellence. We must not forget, however, that the landlord is often a man who, in other spheres of life, is an honest producer and a useful member of society. The landlord often couples with his useless and injurious landlordism the function of house lord, if we may use the term. In other words, he may and often does, as an honest producer through his own labor or his own in conjunction with others, provide houses and streets and sewers and sidewalks to make them available, for which he gets an honest revenue, along with the land for which he exacts a revenue and has no basis in honesty. Often, too, landlordism is only incidental to other callings and occupations in life. Many a man is a landlord in a small way or even in a large way on the side, while devoting his time and energies to honest production in other lines. But as a landlord, he produces nothing and gives nothing in return for his revenue from the land. The landlord, often a mere speculator himself in land values, is vastly more of a detriment to society than the speculator in grains or stocks. The latter gets something for nothing to a considerable degree from other gamblers like himself, on whom we need waste little sympathy. But the landlord gets his something for nothing in the great majority of cases from the toilers and producers of the world, and on top of that, by holding vacant land idle, stands a barrier to prevent honest production by vast armies of men who would gladly put the land to use to the unspeakable benefit of themselves and of the community. The market gambler in his best aspect is no worse than a pauper supported by the free gifts of society, but the economic status of the landlord is that of the highway robber, who, gun in hand, forces his victim to stand and deliver. Producing nothing himself, he is able to live on the fat of labor's products by simply getting in the way of other men who want to produce and compelling them to hand over to him a large share of their probable earnings before he will stand aside and let them work. Landlords not to blame. But it would be both unjust and futile to hold the landowners of the present day responsible for the land system. It was here before them, and they have come to be land monopolists just as unconsciously and just as innocently as their neighbors have come to be land despoiled. It is the system and not the individual that is at fault, and it is society as a whole, the landless included, that is responsible for the system. Nor is it to be wondered at that society is only beginning to awaken to a realization of the wrong. In America, at least, the system has been inherited from a time when land was abundant within easy reach of all, and when it was far from anyone's thought that the policy of letting each man monopolize all the land he could would result in a few generations in making lords of the few and serfs of the many. Nor can the few help themselves or society in the matter, if they so desire, not even by renouncing their land ownership and monopoly, so long as the land system remains unchanged. That would mean a mere change of masters. The circle of land owners might be enlarged a little in the process, but that is all. The great mass of their fellow men would still be landless, and with no more hope than now of ever bettering their condition. The landowner who wishes to see the who wishes to see the principles of honesty prevail among men need not begin by giving away his possessions. What must be done first is to change the system, and his efforts to that end will be all the more effective because he is a landowner, since the self-abnegation of his activities would be, with those to whom he must direct his appeal, the guarantee of an unselfish motive. Land reform. But what change shall we make in the system? It is not the purpose of this little volume to present a ready-made remedy for our unrighteous land laws, but rather to call attention to the essentials of a righteous land system and to its bearing upon honesty in the world of affairs. The minds of many constructive statesmen are already grappling with the land problem, and it is a long way on the road to solution. The question is pushing to the front in many states and in many countries. Very naturally, different methods will be tried in different commonwealths, and each will feel its way, relying in some degree upon the results attained by the others. A new system will not come in all at once, but gradually, here a little and there a little, subjecting itself to the tests of practical experience as it advances. The prime requisite of an honest land system is that every man at all times shall have access to the resources, the earth, on equal terms with every other man. If all land were of the same value, it would be comparatively easy to apportion it and reapportion it equally to all, so that each man should have his just share and opportunity. Or if land values were permanent in character, each man might have apportioned to him land to an equal value with that of every other man. But not only do similar areas of land differ in value from each other, but the same land differs in value from one year to another, or from one decade to another, so that neither of these plans would result in equity or justice. And as an additional difficulty, the greatest obstacle of all to any scheme of apportionment and reapportionment there stands in the way the necessity of providing a stable and reasonably lasting tenure of land. Men must have permanent homes on the land and must have permanent use of certain tracts of land in order to make the use of land practicable and righteous. For land cannot be used to any advantage in any kind of production, agricultural or other, without the investment of capital in the form of improvements, which no man would either care or dare to make unless assured of an undisputed holding for a term of years. The problem then is to find a system that will give to all men all the time equal access to the land, equal benefit in land values, and a permanent tenure of the land they use. The Henry George Plan. A solution that meets all these requirements has been prominently before the world for many years in what is known as the single tax. This proposition, promulgated a generation ago by Henry George, is based upon the truths that the earth belongs to humanity and that land values are a social product, and seeks to apply these truths by requiring every man to pay to humanity and society, or to the government which represents humanity and society, the full annual value of all land that he uses or holds for himself. It is thus a mere matter of quid pro quo. For everything that he takes from the common store, each man would pay back a full equivalent into the common treasury. This annual value or rent constitutes the single tax, which is so called because the plan contemplates the levying of no other tax of any kind. The present landowner would be secure in his holdings so long as he paid the tax, but his ownership would be merely nominal, since he would have no right in the land that he could sell save, of course, his improvements, and possibly, between valuations, a small equity of leasehold. This would seem an injustice in the case of the man who had paid good money for the land to some other man under the present system, and yet the first man had no equity in the land, save what society had presented to him as a gift. And what society can give, society can take away.